Yes, I did.
That seems like a way distant memory to me now.
What's happening in the schoolhouse, Sue? What are you
We
seeing?
just started.
What are you seeing now?
We just started last Wednesday, and then we had Monday off. I'm teaching Southern food ways, which is so fun with a friend of mine, and he's doing it's an interdisciplinary class. We're team teaching, and he's doing the history, and I'm doing the folklore and the writing. Then the Old American Lit. That's what I'm doing.
What about your students? I mean, so you had sensed a little bit of a change, a hangover
Yeah, I just
from the
sent them.
COVID.
It's for real. I did a presentation on it in November at Miami of Ohio, and they all agreed to.
Faculty.
It's a real thing. It was faculty from all over the country. So I don't know. We'll see. The end of last semester was just a total disaster.
How so?
Just not turning work in. I had 2 graduating seniors who failed. Like graduating seniors.
You would think they would
Oh my, get
over the hump. Yeah.
it always is just tragic because one of them, her family had already gotten there for graduation, and her father
Poor baby.
came up to the department. Well, he didn't know what she had. I mean, she hadn't turned in anything all semester, so it wasn't like she was just missing an assignment. So that was, I mean, I don't know. It's real.
Hello, Bob. Hello, Sarah.
Mike.
Bob.
We'll see what happens.
Sue Trout right here.
Hi,
Hi,
nice to
Sarah.
meet you. Come in.
You guys sit there.
Look at my old friend.
First, but if you'll say that, Chair.
Oh, Richard, how are you? I'm well. I'm so glad you've done that, Sue. I hope you can.
I was trying to protect y'all. We've just got kids getting sick left and right at school this week. Because it's the second week, you know.
So is she gonna try to make up the semester this spring?
She's not enrolled. I don't know what, her advisor and I were just talking before I came over. She's not enrolled. And then a religion professor's daughter also was supposed to graduate and did not. And it's just bizarre.
It makes me sad.
It is sad. Like we were really sad about that girl whose father came for graduation. I mean, the whole family was there. And it was like, sorry,
That would be bad.
your daughter forgot to tell me a couple things. Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, something a little bit cracky happens and you say, okay, I'll tackle that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Let me give me a day
Give
to
me a day to think about it.
gather my thoughts, and then I'll tackle it tomorrow. I gotta tell them before they
Would a
come.
D be passing?
Yeah, but
Well, I remember my sophomore year in high school, we had to write I think it was a 20-page paper. And one of the guys had a quote that was 19 pages long, and he was able to get a D out of that. And so I need to counsel your student to say.
D is for diploma.
Right. Good ingenuity or something.
Right now, all of the faculty in the last
John,
You get my
week
note? I did.
has been
Those are-
flipping out about the AI writing app. So we'll see what happens there.
Right.
It doesn't bother me, but
It does not.
no, because if you teach writing,
You think you're gonna discern it? I'm not being smart. You think
Yeah.
you'll discern it?
all the information is saying that the writing is really stilted and and it gets a lot of information wrong, but unless you know what they're talking about, you might not know it's wrong.
Okay.
And if you teach writing,
One
you
would hope.
know the
One would
difference
hope.
between their voices.
Especially if it's a class small enough where you know the students somewhat.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the English faculty is not worried. It's the rest
I
of the
mean,
people.
if somebody presents you with
I intended to lock you out. That was me. Locked.
Why have you- somebody let me in, a lovely human.
Yeah, well.
I guess I looked.
I tried to.
I guess I looked like I wasn't gonna.
Did you see Doonesbury
cause
on
too much
Sunday?
So
trouble.
John Bailey submitted a paper to you, and it was lacking some abstruse points that nobody gives a damn about. If it didn't do that, you know, this isn't from John.
That's not real.
It's so good to see you again.
This is awesome. We have a high turnout today.
Great.
Enterprise and software.
How are you all? Okay.
I told Ann what you said.
We got your neighbor here, Delphine.
So, Carol says to me, "You shouldn't charge you $1."
She can be merciful. Can't read review.
In fact, since then, when you handed me National WBC or WBC now. You're doing a great job.
We're gonna sit in the AN section right back here. I'll sit back here. Carol's gonna sit next to you.
So I'm so sorry I missed your last class. I'm now reading Winesburg, Ohio.
Oh, do you like it?
Very good.
Yeah, we love it.
Yeah, very good.
So look at this here. We have a quorum. Just throw out a little Walker Percy
I
and
know. We should have.
we've got a quorum. This is outstanding.
Tapped into Walker Percy a long time ago.
Let me have us come together and welcome those of you who might be zooming in as well. I mentioned in the announcement at dinner on Sunday morning during Sunday school, I'm going to show this film about Walker Percy, a documentary, a wonderful overview for those who don't know him. He is somebody I've studied a good bit over the years, and I've wanted us to engage his books. His famous one, Moviegoer, is when he won the National Book Prize for. But in some respects, I kind of like this one even better. This, by the way, is that Mary
Oh, good.
Carl
Thank you.
thing that I gave you. So grateful, Sue, for you coming and being with us. Sue told me that she has 3 very long days teaching, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and that her Wednesday, she teaches till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So she is on especially difficult duty. And I am so thrilled that so many of you have come out to be part of this tonight. So Sue, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't complain because I have Tuesday, Thursday off, so it's not like, you know, working in the salt mine or anything. Hey, it's so good to see y'all. Okay, so as we usually do, I'm gonna start by doing some introductory material. How many of you have read Walker Percy? Oh gosh, that's a lot. Have you read this book or The Moviegoer? Yeah. Whoa, that's awesome.
Maybe the last gentleman.
Yeah, The Last Gentleman.
Thanatos syndrome,
Yeah,
the second
these
coming.
Walker Percy people. I love Walker Percy. I just think he's smart and funny. For those of you who are new or coming to Walker Percy for the first time, he had an unsettled childhood. He was born in Alabama, and his father committed suicide when Percy was 13 years old, which of course, pretty important age. And then his mother dies in a car wreck 2 years later. So he and his younger brothers go to live with his uncle, William Alexander Percy, who lived in Greenville, Mississippi. But he was a fairly well-known writer in the South of his own merits. And he was always considered, it's so funny because if you ever look up William Alexander Percy, it always says he was a bachelor, poet, lawyer, planter. And so I think it's fascinating that Walker Percy in some ways is sort of almost a quintessential Southern stereotype almost, you know, who has this tragic or painful childhood, but then kind of moves into this very patrician sort of Southern gentleman sort of territory as he's raised to adulthood by his uncle. Now, here's why I'm talking about this, because he says it was that his uncle probably had the greatest influence on Walker Percy in terms of his kind of voracious reading and the kinds of things he read, but also because he said, and this is really important when you read Walker Percy, that his uncle was his model. Have we ever had this many people? This is awesome. That is, come on. So I want you to be aware of this, that he said his uncle was the model he used for that Greek Roman Stoic personality. And if you read Walker Percy, there's a Stoic in nearly every novel. And we'll talk about that as we move forward, but look for it. The other fun or weird thing about Walker Percy is he went to UNC, was a chemistry major, and then goes to medical school, finishes medical school, and begins his residency at Bellevue Hospital in New York City. But he, a year later, contracts tuberculosis. And this is significant, A, because, well, he got tuberculosis because they never wore masks or gloves, the graduate students, that's what he said. It's really not a good idea. But he enters into this 5-year period of convalescence. And it's during that period that he just reads and reads everything he can get his hands on. But he also has 3 years of Freudian analysis. So these are all interesting, weird facts about Walker Percy. But I want you, as you move into this book, to think about that idea of sort of having a 5-year period of nothing really to do but convalesce and read. That sounds like heaven to some of us, but there's something about that experience, not just of sickness, but the reading and then the analysis. All of these experiences impact him in a way that you will see in his writing. The thing about the convalescence is, and we'll see this in Love in the Ruins, and it's in The Moviegoer, is that Walker Percy's perspective of the world shifts. And this happens in all of his literature too. The idea that he calls it a rotation. It's a Kierkegaard thing where most of us are going through our daily lives, not paying attention, being busy, but something can happen that rotates your perspective and you begin to see everything differently. This happens, especially, it's sort of Flannery O'Connor-y in the way that it's often something violent or unexpected. So after his convalescence, he converts to Roman Catholicism, and that's important for Love in the Ruins. It becomes a very important part of his life. He publishes The Moviegoer in 1961. So I want you to get a sense that we think of him as more contemporary in Southern writing. He is postmodern, but not experimental in the way that we have looked at postmodernism before. I'm going to close this if this is okay.
Yeah, sorry.
You might get distracted. But he's a fairly traditional writer, but he's dealing with these very sophisticated philosophical and intellectual ideas. Okay, let's see. Okay, are you ready for this? Try to follow this because you don't have to write it down. Maybe I'll type it up and you can have it next week to kind of follow along. So during his illness, Walker Percy deeply reads Kierkegaard. And without question, critics say the influence of Kierkegaard on his writing can't be overestimated. Okay, blah, 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 philosopher, but here's why he's important for us. Kierkegaard, is a 19th century Danish theologian, philosopher. Did you all ever have to study all that? You did? Here's why this matters for us. And maybe I'll just write this down so you can have it. So here's what Walker Percy sort of takes away. Okay. Walker Percy takes from Kierkegaard this notion that humans, particularly, he always talks about man, but he means it in a general way, goes through 3 stages in his life. And in this novel, not just this one, but for us, you see if you can identify the stages. So Kierkegaard, then Percy, argued that human beings begin in this aesthetic stage, which is just a fancy word for saying we begin by following the pleasure principle only. The ego, or no, the id, right? If you look at Freud. This is the immediate man, the sensuous man, the hedonist. I don't know what is going on with men there. What do you think? 20s, 30s, 40s? I don't know.
We go out of it.
Do you? And then this stage, he says men are unreflective and undifferentiated from their environment. Their lives are governed by a search for pleasure. Got that? John Bailey, you look a little suspicious. This is Kierkegaard, not me.
I mean, yeah. Are you going to talk about the ground of our being? I mean, that's fundamental to Kierkegaard.
I can, but then we'd probably be here all night.
Okay.
That's why I'm thinking maybe I should write some of this down and just let you have a handout. So stage 1, the aesthetic man, whooping it up, not thinking. Number 2 is the ethical man. And this is when people become aware of issues beyond themselves, that they begin to reflect and feel obligations. So some really kind of growing up. But then hopefully you enter into stage 3, the religious man. And the religious man is someone who becomes aware of his individuality, begins to recognize and accept sinfulness, and to feel a need for God. So in his life, and you'll see it in his writing, Percy is always looking at this tension between science and spirituality. I mean, he's a doctor, and he's a doctor who graduates from medical school and never practices medicine. Like, what's that about? You know what I mean? But what he finds, especially during his illness and because of the tragedy in his past, is he's a man who devotes himself to science, Walker Percy, but realizes science doesn't fulfill all of his needs or answer all of his questions. And he's such a searching kind of person that he finds some of those answers in religious philosophy and Roman Catholicism. That's all fancy talk. In his work, and I want you to think about this as you go into Love in the Ruins, there's a personal pilgrimage. See if you can identify the stages of development if you think those occur. So, when a number of you read Walker Percy, did you like him? Why?
Because he understands the game of golf
What do you mean?
very, very well. And that's comparable to understanding the game of life. If you get golf. And this book is particularly cogent on golf. And so that's enough reason to like.
You think so? Richard, why do you like him?
I think I started reading him because he was Southern.
Yeah.
He was trying to figure out what Christianity was all about.
Yes. So we can go way up here and talk about, Christian ethics and Kierkegaard. But in some ways, this is someone searching for meaning and God. And how do you articulate that? It's so interesting that you would say he's a Southern writer, because he tried really hard not to be called a Southern writer. So he's in the generation after, like, Faulkner and Flannery. Well, he's kind of a contemporary of Flannery O'Connor, but she dies pretty quick.
Another one said her accent something he couldn't understand a word she said.
Right, and his best friend was Shelby Foote, and I don't know if you know Shelby Foote, but he's someone I adore.
It's the one this book dedicated to.
Yeah, and so he had another famous story where he said, he and Shelby Foote made this pilgrimage to Faulkner's house, and Walker Percy refused to go in.
Just get out of the car.
That's right, because he thought it would just, mess him up. And he said, this is so interesting. He said he was trying to resist Faulkner's influence because it had been so definitive in terms of what a Southern writer is. And he said, I would dearly love never to hear the New South mentioned again. In fact, my definition of a New South would be a South in which it never occurred to anybody to mention the New South. And one of the reasons he sort of tried to move away from this idea of a Southern writer is because he felt that there were so much stigma and stereotyping connected to that. And he wanted to make sure people realized he wasn't interested necessarily in specifically Southern issues or problems. And he said, I'm interested in the old Adam, which I love, right? The whole idea of what it means to be a person. And then he said, he just talks Southern because I do. So he's an interesting writer in the sense that people usually really like him, in part because his characters are so clearly on these pilgrimages or searching for something. And what Walker Percy makes clear is that the postmodern age has separated itself from what a church should be. And he thinks of, and we'll talk about this in a minute, that the modern, what we think of as the postmodern world, and think about, he's writing in the 60s and 70s predominantly. He says that America is a sexual wasteland, that the world right now, which for him was 50 years ago, so think, he said he really believed the world was at a low point in the contemporary world. And what he's trying to show is that this search for God is the answer. That he says we are capable of sadness and joy, damnation and beatitude. The image of God takes unique and observable shape in the human. So he is grappling with a contemporary society that he thinks is utterly secularized. But he also worries that the contemporary church is secularized. And so you'll watch the way in which he appears to criticize the church as what? A system, as a corporate entity? That seems bad to say it that way. Institution is the right way. But always in search of, in this fundamental belief that answers reside in God. So in all of Walker Percy, the church is always in the background. But he believed that being a Christian means you have an interest in reform and morality. So these become these controlling ideas in Walker Percy. What is morality? What is moral, right? As opposed to immoral. And so in everything, there's sort of eventually some kind of affirmation. He says, the God who sits in his heavens and laughs our folly to scorn is first and finally the God of grace, who in Jesus Christ humorously accepts and thus transforms our sin into the occasion for his mercy. That's pretty nice, right? But as a writer, Hank said, if I had assigned this book in the 70s, he wouldn't have read it. Tell us why.
A bridge too far from reality.
Yeah.
Sue always talks about stuff needing to have some verisimilitude, and this would just be so removed from anything that could ever really happen in the real world.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me set you up. And for next time, if you can get through the first July 4th, which is in my book, 55 pages, but the print is pretty big. Here are the things I want to talk about. And they kind of touch on what Hank is saying, because this book, unlike so much other of his writing, is a dystopia. I don't know if we've ever done a dystopia together. What's a dystopia? Because your kids love them. Yeah. What is a
Things are falling apart.
Yes.
It's not a utopia, it's the opposite of a utopia.
Yes. So it's one of the single most popular
What's the
kinds
Greek
of
for
literature.
utopia is no place.
Right. So I just find it fascinating.
We did Hunger
students,
Games, no?
like really to young people from 16 to about 20. It's their favorite kind of literature right now. And I totally get it, but it also makes me sad. Because in dystopic literature, something has gone terribly wrong. And it can take many forms, right? Often it's a war or some kind of atomic particles or whatever. Something's gone terribly wrong, where the world has to start again. So on the one hand, they're mostly apocalyptic, right? But you've read dystopias, 1984, you probably did, you all read that in school. But students have all of those Hunger Game kinds of series, YA literature is dystopic. And so often they're bleak. Wastelands, the modern world is beyond repair. And then hopefully, if there's hope in a dystopia, it's that there's a starting over. So we have to think about, in this book, what's happened, what's gone wrong, is there going to be a starting over? If the world ended, and this is, I think, a fascinating question, if the world ended in the way that we know it, would Christianity survive?
God says there's always going to be a remnant.
Yeah. I think it would survive too. Do you think we're too optimistic? Why do you think? Why do you think it will? Because I agree. I think it will too.
I think love and grace are eternal things, and they exist in places that we do not even know.
Yeah, and I also think the thing in us that searches is in there too. And if you, I'm sure some of you read Cormac McCarthy, speaking of dystopias, in The Road, he makes it very clear that some form of Christianity will continue in much the way you explain it, even if the language in which we talk about it changes. Do you see what I mean? And so I think Walker, that's partly why Walker Percy says, you know, I write about the old Adam, how human beings learn to live, how in the world, how they find ways to make the world mean something. But I do want you to get that this is a dystopic novel.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
When you ask whether Christianity would survive,
Mm-hmm.
I might argue that that's too narrowly drawn.
Maybe. You may be
But
right.
She just said in a language that is also, to me, I think agnostics and atheists are Christians.
Well, and also, Well, and also so many other religions believe in a God, but not necessarily the way we define a Christian God.
A theistic base.
Oh, yeah.
Some sort.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
different than Christian. To me, it's much broader concept.
I totally get
And
what
then
you're saying.
alongside it, I would also ask, and he does raise this question that you'll get to. You have ethics
Yes.
that he sees as distinct from religion.
Yes.
So all of those are wrapped into the question you've asked.
Yeah. That's beautiful. You're exactly right. So here's what I want to caution you about. This dystopia is wild. And I think that's in part what Hank's alluding to when he goes, nothing like this would ever happen. Which is what people always say about dystopias until they actually happen. Do you know what I mean? If you've ever read the Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood says quite clearly, nothing in this book hasn't already happened or is in the process of happening. And students will read it and go, no way will this ever happen. Well, I don't know.
Under the banner of heaven.
Yes, exactly right. You know, you go, and they don't get that Margaret Atwood was, went to Harvard to study American Puritanism, you know, which is a religious theocracy. So you have to be careful with a dystopia because it's wild. The opening of this book, you're going, what is happening? It's disorienting. But I have tried to teach y'all, being disoriented is the space a lot of readers want you in. Because when you're disoriented, you're trying to find your way or your balance, or you give up.
Tom Moore is disoriented.
Yes.
Do you feel that the people he's interacting with share his disorientation?
I know, not in the way he's disoriented, but it opens in this sort of really frenetic, kind of violent, confusing way.
Upheaval.
Yes, total upheaval.
Well, he
And-
talks about the ruined shopping center,
Yeah.
but I don't hear the other people talking about the ruined shopping center.
No. And we have to kind of figure out why you think that is, right?
I hadn't gotten that far.
Okay. Well, let's start here. So anyway, I just want you to be ready because it's weird. It's also, to me, super funny. But anytime you talk about humor, that's a weird topic too, right? Because I'm a person that thinks Catch-22 is hilarious. I think,
Confederacy of Dunces.
yeah, hilarious.
And speaking of Confederacy of Dunces, I was reading up on Walker Percy. He was very instrumental in getting it published.
Yes.
And he was teaching at Loyola. I had not known that, but I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. And so listen, so here are some things going on with Walker Percy. And this is why he can be disorienting. He's so smart. He understands satire. So you've got dystopia, which is one kind of genre, and satire. And a lot of his satire goes directly to these issues or problems he identifies as what is going to ruin us or what has ruined us. And that gets into, and you see this so clearly in like the first couple of pages, this whole wasteland thing. He thinks that America is a wasteland. P.S., not a new idea. Right? World War I, Fitzgerald, Eliot, but he is sort of positioning the novel and the narrator in the latter days of the United States. Like it's all about to crash and burn. And I love the first paragraph, which is a sentence. Now in these dread latter days of the old, violent, beloved USA, and of the Christ forgetting, Christ haunted, death dealing Western world, I came to myself in a grove of young pines, and the question came to me, has it happened at last? What? So you're getting ready to go on a ride. And he opens this book with these binary oppositions. The old, violent, beloved, those seem like opposing ideas, yes? Beloved, violent, Christ forgetting, Christ haunted. I love that phrase.
Isn't that a Southern novel phrase?
Yes, yes.
Well, Flannery O'Connor said the South is Christ haunted. And what you have here is someone trying to find balance in these oppositions. So I just want you to be ready because it's like a weird roller coaster ride.
When our heroes get ready to take his walk through hell with Dante in the Inferno, midway through the course of life, I found myself alone in a dark wood.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Who is our main character? Let's at least set this up.
Thomas More.
Yeah.
You're right.
And who is that?
Psychiatrist.
Yes. So we have Tom More in the 20th century, yes, who shares a name with Sir Thomas More,
A distant ancestor, he says.
who writes Utopia, and he's writing a dystopia. And, you know, Thomas More did not have things easy. You know, he works under Henry VIII, right? But he was someone who was kind of identified as a humanist and someone identified as a reformist. And so that's opposition to, right? You've got Tom More, this scallywag with 3 women waiting for him at a hotel, and he's trying to decide where, you know, what their deal is. And then you've got every Henry VIII movie we've ever seen with Sir Thomas More in his long, distinguished robes. Things don't go well for him eventually, but why? Like, why make that up? That's a weird makeup, right? Why Tom More? Why Thomas More? What's the opposition there?
Well, because Thomas More, Sir Thomas, is the model of ethical
Yes.
behavior as understood.
Yeah, 100%. Beautiful. So you've got the ethical man, Sir Thomas More, and then this seemingly hedonist guy, clearly in stage 1, right? Following the pleasure principle, who is in this wasteland that is modern America, and there are shots randomly sort of, you know, coming his way, and it's with some weird highway business, right? So on the one hand, when we talk about Walker Percy and we start saying these beautiful things about these phases that people go through towards God and enlightenment and ethics and the ethical man, it all just sounds beautiful and like a Sunday school lesson. But then you get down to this novel and it's so real and nitty gritty that somehow you have to kind of say to yourself, all right, so we've got the old world in tension with this contemporary world or new world. And then these fundamental human questions that haven't changed since the beginning of time, like, what does it mean to be an ethical human? What does it mean to be a religious human? Because these are all big, giant philosophical questions that we mostly don't talk about or articulate, right? And Walker Percy is going to try to walk you through this. One of the things that he's really worried about as a writer and a human is what's gone wrong in the contemporary world. Any ideas? Come on.
Tribalism.
Mistreatment of others, other groups.
Yeah,
Other
but
races.
that's been around since the beginning of time, right? We've always mistreated others, haven't we?
Are you
Yes.
thinking there's gonna be some unprecedented thing
Here's-
in evil that we dreamed up that's not been tried before?
No. I think what you're gonna find is when you read Walker Percy, even though it seems super contemporary and disjointed and odd, what he's talking about are all of the problems of the old Adam from the beginning that keep sort of appearing as we move through time. But now the suggestion of this novel is that by the time we get to the late 20th century, we're getting to the end of days. Like we've gone too far. But what we have to figure out is gone too far in what? So if I said to you, do you think, because I hear this in so many ways, that, because you know I married a Pentecostal, that the world is hurtling towards the end. Every Sunday, my husband's brother is a Pentecostal preacher. And every Sunday, he'll begin by saying, I really think this is it. I really think our days are numbered and
When
that.
people were saying that in the 30s and the 20s.
Exactly. So the question is always, and there are so many people firmly convinced, and maybe you are too. Do you think the world in the 21st century is worse than when you were growing up? Yes? Look at all these yeses. Oh, John Bailey says no.
It's a lot of both. It's a lot better in some ways and not as good in others.
Yeah, I think
He
it's,
does plant himself down where? In paradise.
Yes.
Okay. And paradise, as he draws it, and I'm not stealing this show at all, but it's a perfect community.
Yeah.
Everything.
It's gated.
I thought it was walled and gated.
Yeah.
Why?
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's the
But John says it's got a golf course.
Yes.
Of course, that's lighted.
He really gets into it. Yeah, the fundamental question. What? Yeah, what is paradise? And then, of course, you've got all the swamp stuff.
Oh, that's why.
So what, in some ways, he is looking at, and I want you to be able to talk about this. Is the world hurtling towards the end as we know it? Are we destroying ourselves as a community of human beings? Is the world worse off than when you were growing up? And if so, can you articulate how or why?
Polarization.
You know, one thing. So this book was written in 1971. That's
Yes.
the year I graduated from college. And So I'm reading this and I'm thinking, in one way, and I just read, not even the whole first section yet. It seems, so a lot of anachronism, you know, and this is, but also it's so familiar.
Yes.
And so, I mean, so the world, it feels like we're hurtling towards destruction, but maybe not. I mean, maybe.
Yes.
Isn't it the role of the prophet to suggest that we may be in dystopia when you're feeling like you're in utopia?
Yes. And what Cormac McCarthy grapples with this a lot, this idea that, you know, pretty much every generation thinks we're hurtling towards the end, or that things used to be better at another time. And often they are not, because humans are humans no matter what the time is. Now, Walker Percy does believe that in the 20th and I think as we go into the 21st century, the thing he worries about often the most is this secular humanism. This idea that we identify ourselves as humanists and humanitarians, and we sort of try to live what we think of as an ethical life. And this is Flannery O'Connor's big thing too. But where is God?
And that's, to me, the big contribution that he makes to the discussion, because
Yeah.
as I read this, he is asking, is the end game
Yes.
physical, this world, or is it metaphysical?
Yes.
And that's a pretty large question.
And it's not only is it a large question, it's not one that as a community, we often bandy about, right? We talk about secular humanism all the time, whether we know that phrase or not. Like, what is the appropriate behavior? I mean, you know, I'm in the humanities, right? And so I believe in the essential dignity of every human being, and I believe in that. There's nothing in the humanities that says, I also believe in God. It's not in there. So we talk about secular humanism all the time, but are we as a culture separate from God? What does that mean? And how is that going to impact whatever these individual and communal journeys are? Here's what secular humanism is. I'm gonna be careful. Okay, Carl.
You're already in.
All right, good. Like, I cannot tell you how many times I hear this now from students, where they'll be in a discussion of some kind, and you always hear the person over here go, I'm not religious, but I am.
Spiritual.
What the
And
heck?
every one that does that thing said the first one to say it.
I know. Oh my God, you're so right. And then I always want to stop and go, okay, can we push into this? Even though mostly I'm eavesdropping, so I know. I want to go, okay, how do you define these terms? And what do you think that actually means? What does spiritual mean as opposed to religious? Because what they're actually saying is, I don't go to church, but I see myself as a spiritual person. And then, you know, what does that mean, right? So he's going to play into all of these things, but it is a satire and a dystopia. So I do want to caution you, the reading is weird. I think it's really funny, but I have that kind of weird satire humor. Do you know what I mean?
Was I the only one that laughed out
Oh,
loud?
I think it's hilarious.
This will scare you. This will scare you, John. I laughed out loud.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, that actually makes me happy. I do this with students all the time, and my daughter, the professor at Belmont, is teaching a class, another interdisciplinary class on humor. And so we talk about it all the time because, and I talk about it with my students because I'll go, humor is sort of like these spiritual questions. We kind of have it on our mind, but trying to articulate why something is funny is one of the hardest things ever, right? So I'll say to students, you know, I laugh at every episode of New Girl. They just make me laugh. But I've never once even chuckled at a show. Like, what was that show with all those nerds on it that was on forever? Do you know what I'm talking about? Yes. I mean, it never even, like most of the time I was going, So you go, what is that about? See, that's what I mean. And I talk about this with my students all the time because and then you go, well, what is my sense of humor? I'm not quite sure, but I think this book is really funny. And it's okay for you to think it's funny. For a lot of people, it just makes them uncomfortable. So we will talk about that and we will work on your satirical humor as we go through. All right, here are the things I want to talk about next time. This first section that kind of situates us in the plot problems. I want to talk about Tom Moore. In Walker Percy, you most often have these male protagonists who are in what the moviegoer in Walker Percy called a malaise. So what's wrong with that? You know, what is a malaise? I want to see if you can identify what Tom Moore is up against. I also love this line because I talked about this in school today, not this book, but in a different context. Can you identify and describe America, the wasteland? Do you think we're living in a wasteland? I love that idea. It makes people very uncomfortable. And he asks this question on the very first page. Is it that God has at last removed his blessing from the USA? Which implies that he gave it, which is not a new idea, yes? And I think people talk about this, right? That as a culture, we're putting ourselves at jeopardy with God, not even on an individual basis, but as a cultural basis, you know? I just find it fascinating. I want you to be able to talk about Tom Moore. I want you to be able to talk about the setting, because the setting is really important. This idea of Christendom that is at waste. And so we'll look at that. The structure of this book, the first 4 days of July, right? So we'll try to take one day each week. So not only is this a kind of philosophical book, a satire, a dystopia, this kind of journey towards religious, and for Walker Percy, Christian awakening, but it's also a book about America. That in some ways, the end of days, the apocalypse, is connected to this country that when the Europeans arrived, fundamentally believed God is on our side. He picked this place. He lets us win all the wars. I mean, till Vietnam, we're like 9-1, yeah? And that doesn't even really count as a loss because that would maybe not even really a war, whatever that was, right? In literature, we call that pocket providence, you know, I mean, God's on our side from everything from a war to a football game, right? And you go, why do we do that? And why America? And the narrator starts by saying, oh no, do you think what is wrong? On page 1, do you think what is wrong is this disconnection from God?
And keep in mind that on the 4th of July, the event that is coming is what? A golf tournament.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ golf tournament.
Yes.
In paradise. Now, is that not wonderful?
Oh gosh.
You don't laugh at that.
Well, and y'all, is he just cuckoo? Do you all do you remember that PTL amusement park?
Yes.
Yes.
Tammy Faye, I bumped into Tammy Faye at the mall. A t-shirt had this woman's makeup smeared right there, and the caption, I bumped into Tammy Faye at the mall.
This idea is not that far away from.
I think this is where Donovan says, you know, profit.
Yes, I was gonna call it.
And really
Post-capitalism.
speaking to what he saw nascent in the Southern culture,
Yeah,
the whole of America perhaps, but also this, you know, John pointed out, this juxtaposition of man-made paradise
yes,
versus what perhaps paradise and the echo we have of what God has intended paradise to be.
well, and the ways in which we sort of make ourselves feel better by
And that's-
couching all of this in the language of Christianity, right? That it's okay if you have an amusement park or, you know, a Jesus golf tournament, or you know what I mean? That's post-capitalism, this idea that we've become so separate from any kind of spiritual value. But y'all, I don't know if we've ever been different as humans.
Don't forget, as you read the book, how Tom Moore spells his last name.
Yeah. How?
M-O-R-E.
That's right.
More instead of two.
That's right. All right. Are you ready? It's so good, but it's an adventure. Keep your eye on Tom. Don't get distracted by all the kooky stuff. Laugh if you want to, despair if you must. And let's see if we can kind of follow Tom Moore on this journey towards whatever. Got it? So next time, sorry, 55, get through July 4th, the first July 4th. You know what I'm talking about? You can do it. It's going to be super fun. In a kooky way. It is nerve-wracking. What do you mean by that?
Just describes
I think-
patience. For the
Question, I think, you know, that I may live in my own utopia and questioning it
Makes you uncomfortable?
makes it, you know, so if I went into Nashville and saw kids sleeping in office buildings because they don't have any homes,
Mhm.
and that's normal.
Yeah.
And I can go sleep in my bed at night. You know, I'd rather just keep myself away from that
Agreed.
in order to understand my own utopia.
Yeah, and that's part of what Walker Percy would call that malaise, that as a culture, we're just sort of numb to so many things. Yeah, I totally get it. And I love that you said it's nerve-wracking, because that's how I feel when I read a book like this. The same feeling I had reading The Handmaid's Tale. Like, it really makes me feel anxiety. I think partly because so much of it, no matter how weird, is recognizable. And then he has this really interesting way of making you go, okay, do I have some responsibility here? Am I supposed to be doing something? Or, yes, yes. But there's so much about Walker Percy that's just quite beautiful too, especially with communication and language and this concept of intersubjective communion, which we'll get to, but it's like one of my favorite things of all time.
He writes so well too, the use of the weather and the birds and all those kind of things.
I love Walker Percy, and I'm so happy that we're doing this because I teach him maybe once every decade in a Southern Lit class, and I only do the moviegoer. And I taught this book too. We used to have religion and literature, but now the religion people teach it. It's true. I loved that class.
Is Tom Moore the only one that notices the vines taking over things?
We don't know.
I'm not gonna tell you.
We don't know if we got an unreliable narrator or not, right? We got. our-
Look at that, Hank, I've taught him so much. All right, you guys. 55 pages, 7 days, you can do it. All right? And we'll get into the business next time and take this apart.
When I was in school, soon there was a movie out called Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah, I know that movie. I know. I'm so glad to be here. I'm so glad to be here.